One, just letting some folks jump in here. All right, we will get started. Welcome. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started here in just a moment as others continue to log in. I know we're seeing more people pop in. So while you're waiting, feel free to check out social channels using the QR code on your screen. You'll see some little LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. My name is Stacy Padgington. I'm the sales director here at Checkpoint, and I will be your host for today. So with that, some housekeeping items. So before we jump in, just a few things. Everyone's muted to keep things running smoothly. We'll hold questions until the end for a dedicated Q&A session. And today's session is being recorded, so you'll receive a copy afterward as well. If anything comes up during the presentation, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we get to that. You'll see the little QA button highlighted in the bottom there in the red square box. Perfect. Thank you, Katie. So our webinar team. So I'm joined today by Katie Fernier, our Director of Customer Success and Operations, who will be helping moderate throughout this session. And you'll also be hearing from James Childress, who will be leading today's discussion. And we're excited about that. So thank you, James, for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
All right. So, and before we dive in, I just want to take a minute to level set on who we are. At Checkpoint EHR, we take a partnership first approach, and we're not just a vendor. We work alongside organizations to support long-term success. So those of you who don't know us, we take our partnerships very seriously. We've been focused on behavioral health for over 20 years, and everything we build is designed around real-world workflows. So as organizations grow, complexity tends to grow with them, and our goal is to simplify that so your teams can stay focused on delivering care, right? So what you do best and what we do best partner very well together. How we support you. Next slide, please. Yep. So what does that actually look like in practice? So we focus on simplifying operations while still giving you the tools to scale. Things like automated billing, robust reporting, dedicated success partners, which I would argue is very, very valuable in this industry today. We also prioritize ease of use, because if a system isn't easy to use, it's hard to get real value from it, right? You want it to be, like I like to say, easy peasy lemon squeezy. So, and from a value standpoint, we keep things straightforward, right? So unlimited users, there's no clearinghouse fees, AI-assisted documentation, and tools like client portals and reminders. All of this is designed to reduce administrative burden and support better outcomes for both your staff and your clients. So it's a better experience all the way around. So this is where, this is where I think James is going to fit right in quite nicely. So let's shift to today's focus. So financial strategy for practice leaders, building profitability and future-proofing. So this is a topic we're hearing more and more about, how to grow in a way that's not just sustainable, but actually profitable long-term. Margins are tightening, costs are rising, and many organizations are realizing that growth alone doesn't always translate into financial health, right? So, and this is exactly where James is going to bring a lot of value today. With CAC Advisors, he works closely with organizations to break down what's really driving financial performance, from revenue cycle to margins, and where there are often gaps that aren't immediately visible. So with that, I will turn it over to James to walk us through it.
Thanks so much, Stacy, and very glad to be with all of you today. And we're going to jump right in. We're going to have an awesome time. I'm just so pumped that we're going to be doing this together. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to be pulling this one up here and jumping into our slides. Okay. So yeah, we are talking about future-proofing mental health group practice and ensuring you can succeed. And I have a few disclaimers I want to jump into, because there's a lot of things I like to share. In part, I like to start by talking a little bit about my background and why I'm here and why I'm interested in helping you. So about 6 years ago, just on a wild hair, I said, you know what? I'm going to check out therapy. I want to meet with a therapist. I want to see what this whole thing is about. And I met with a therapist. We hit it off right off the bat, and I found answers to questions I never even knew I had. It was a life-changing experience, and I became immensely passionate about the work that all of you do. And so passionate, I started talking to people about therapy and saying, hey, you should check this therapy thing out. It's really cool. It's not what everyone makes it sound like it is. It's really, really great. And I was so vocal about that. Someone came to me one day and said, hey, my cousin is a psychologist, and I think she might want to talk to you about her practice. Would you be up for that? And I was like, heck yeah, let's do that. Let's see if we can get her some help. Well, that was our first client in the mental health space, and in about 2 years, we had helped her double her practice. And so that felt really, really cool. It felt like, well, maybe we've got sort of a service here, and we should take this show on the road. Well, in 2021, things changed a lot for me personally. I actually lost my mother and my brother that year. And with all the work I'd done and all the things I had learned, it became very clear to me that they would have had better lives and maybe would have had longer lives if they'd had the experience that I had had in therapy. They would have seen some of these things that were going on with them and us and their lives and everything else like that. And so professionally, personally, I was all in. And ever since then, my team and I have been a little bit like a dog with a bone, as I like to say, and we've been fighting for answers for our clients that really give them traction. So I want you to know that that's really what's behind this. We are focused on mental health. We're focused on working with psychologists, social workers, counselors, therapists of all types, because we believe that you're healing the world one session at a time. So we want you to win. And professionally, my background was a little bit different than most. I spent most of my career actually doing auditing and not tax, working with large nonprofits, governmental entities, doing budgeting and financial reporting. You know, my first sense of how this stuff could make a difference was one of our largest clients we ever had. I came to him with this report one day back in, I was printing it out, right? So printed it out, slid it across the table, and I said, this is what I think you need. And he got up out of his chair and walked across the table and he gave me a hug and he said, we've been needing this for years. So like I also believe in the power of good reporting, good insights, good understandings that they can help people make better decisions. So that's kind of the big picture about why I'm here. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's actually going on, because sometimes people dive into sort of the nuts and bolts of what's going on in a practice, and they sort of miss the big picture. And the big picture informs all of the things that are the details and why they matter. And so it's very important to me that we actually talk a little bit about what is actually going on with a group practice. And so the thing is, there is actually two businesses running at the same time. So we think about most businesses, they're customer facing, right? They're trying to provide a good or a service or something valuable to their customer, and they really want them to get something useful out of that. So there's a mutual win on both sides, right? The customer gets what they want. The company ideally has a lifelong customer and they get paid, and there's a mutual relationship. But the thing is, group practices are very much like most professional service organizations, where on one side we're courting the interest of customers and we want them to stick around and get a great experience, but we're also pulling in talent. We're pulling in professionals. It's the same thing for you. We're pulling those professionals in. Ideally, we're giving them the resources to be successful in their profession, and they're growing with organization and growing in their career, and we have to satisfy them as well. So when I talk about profitability and when I talk about succeeding in a group practice, it's not one-sided. It can't be, because if we just handle one side of the equation, we're going to miss one other piece. One of my clients said to me, like, hey, we have people and they get their C, as they call it, they become a, certified, credentialed, right? And then they leave. And I try to be gentle about some of these things, but the question I basically was asking was, can you blame them? Are we making a good deal with our clinicians, a good arrangement with our clinicians, as much as we are with our customers, our patients? So we have to think about kind of how that plays out. And so with that, I'm going to give a story, right? So I call this hammock style. I don't know really what else to refer to this as, but I had this customer or this client come to me once, and we were talking for about four, sessions, and she wasn't a client. We were just kind of seeing if there was something we could help her with. And of course, we take our time. We really like to meet people, or I do. So at some point, she came to me and she said, "You know what, James? I don't think I want your help." I said, "Hey, that's okay. Can I ask why?" And she said, "Well, I don't think you realize I spend most of my afternoons in a hammock." I said, "Well, tell me more." And so what she said basically helped me understand something very interesting about the way these practices work, and really all professional service organizations, because she had what I would call mature clinicians working with her. Not that they were older, but that they were seasoned, and they were licensed, and they were skilled, and they were confident, and they were professionals, really. They'd succeeded in establishing a very good skill set, professional resilience, and all these things that go into being very good at their job. And so, for the most part, she was just keeping things humming along and paying all these people really quite well. And so, the truth is, we're working along this gradient, right? So, when we're working with these clinicians, we're trying to make sure that as they level up, which they're here working with us as owners of these practices, they're trying to do that. As they level up, their situation with us levels up until at some point they sort of reach this level where, they're mostly just leaning on the practice for all of those kind of high level needs. They need support with marketing and billing and credentialing and paneling, and they want to be under an NPI, and they want to have a brand that they're associated with, and peers and all this type of thing. And then we have people who are newer to the profession. They need a lot of guidance and support. They not only need clinical supervision, but like admin supervision, like what's their career track, how are they doing. So but ultimately there's this concept, like at some level there's people working in this organization, they need less and less from us, and we're only profitable with them and keeping them around if we maintain that awareness of their situation and continue to make a good arrangement between them and us. And we do that also with our customers. So in the broader business world, they have this term product market fit, and it's not talked enough, in the non-SaaS, non-software world, I think, because we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to say that the customers who are coming to us are looking for something, and they may know what it is, they may not know what it is, we may not know what, what they know about it, but ultimately it's our job to figure out what really hits the mark for our customer, and in your case, for your patient. And the people who succeed in mental health in their practices are the ones who are watching this like a hawk. What is it that matches the people that come to us? And what is it, the combination between the best things we can offer and the people who are interested in looking for those things, even if they may not know that this is the solution they're looking for. So it's just a core principle, and it guides everything, because product market fit essentially is business, even in mental health private practice. But it's something that we have to iterate on. We have to test it. We have to relentlessly see what works and what doesn't, and continue to find the best solutions for them. So there's also philosophy here that a business will grow until it hits a constraint. If you're providing that positive, useful service to your customers, your business will grow until something basically gets in the way. And we have to realize that when we're talking about strategy of a business, we're talking about the diagnosis and resolution of whether or not we're serving our customer correctly, or whether or not the business is dealing with a constraint in terms of the growth of the business. And if we do those things, we're going to succeed. And so just a basic rundown. So what we're doing is we're testing what suits our customer by developing our internal talent to resolve constraints that arise as we accomplish these things. And in business, well, that's life. So let's talk about some basic financial metrics. So I want this to be something, this presentation, and really any of these things that I do, it's not a sales call, really. It's not me trying to say, hey, come over, work with CAC Advisors. Though of course we'd like to talk and see if we can help you. I want this to live right now as something that gives you an edge. And so we're not going to be talking about every financial metric under the sun. That wouldn't really help you as well in this moment. I want you to get something useful right now that you can move forward with. And so we're going to talk about three major ones and how we use these things. Everyone's aware that they can track their session counts and their receivables and their cash balance, but we're going to talk about why. And we're going to talk about specifically what in those areas are we looking for. So let's start with session counts. It's very important as an owner of your practice or someone who's running a practice or whatever role you might be in, it's very important for you to know what your session counts are. You've got to know if they're trending upward or if they're trending downward. You've got to know if there's seasonality in what you're doing, meaning like if you look at this practice here, you can see that very basically we've got a January through December. We can see in these recent 2 years, excuse me, they bumped up clearly in the spring, right? So that's something they can plan on. We can also see that they're either stable or increasing generally in the fall. Now, that's kind of a common trait, with what we see in these practices. But you can look at sort of the history of what you've got, or you can look around, but you want to try to avoid making a judgment call. As one of my mentors, William Edwards Deming, said, not a mentor, he's someone I look up to, but he's passed, long gone. But he said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Well, I can kind of see that that's hard to hear sometimes. But as an owner, you can't just rely on your gut. You've got to know those numbers, and you've got to really look at them for answers. So we want to see, one, that our session counts are increasing. If that's happening, that's a very good kind of green light that some good things are moving. We also want to watch our receivables. So now, I don't know exactly why. I didn't think I'd put an animation on this, but it's obviously moving. I hope it doesn't space you out like it is me. But this is an accounts receivable aging report. This is like from an example. There's a sample company you can pull up in QuickBooks and look at this. But this report is ubiquitous. It's been around as long as accounting has been around. And it's been around as long as businesses have been around. Basically, you have to know who owes you money, and you have to know how long they've owed it to you. Now, different EHRs handle this at different levels, and very importantly, different billers handle this in different ways. But you need to make sure you've got this report available to you. You have to know who owes you money, and you have to know how long they've owed it to you. Now, importantly, a proper aging report is going to show a 1 to 30 days old, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, and 90 and over 90 days, right? So it's telling you in these kind of columns, these buckets of who owes you what and how long they've owed it to you. Now, most practices that are running at kind of a decent pace, they're going to find in the 1 to 30 days, they're most likely going to have, 1 month of receivables in that bucket. Maybe they have a little more kind of hanging out. If you have a lot of stuff in 30 to 60, 60 to 90, and 90 and over, you may have sort of an untended accounts receivable aging report. And that's a little bit of a problem. You really want to keep this up to date because this is one of the ways you basically tell the future, right? We talked about this, session counts. If you've got sessions increasing, you know that this month is going to be about as good as last month. If you have about 1 month of receivables in your receivables 0 to 30, you know that you've got about 1 month of revenue coming in, right? So those are two big green lights. And then if we look at our cash balance, we like to use a couple kind of high level terms. So there's cash position one, which is where if your cash on hand is equivalent to 1 month of disbursements, that means you can likely reinvest in your company. Cash position zero is where your company, your cash balance is right around where your single largest expense is. So let's say you have a payroll of, just a round number, $50,000, right? $50,000 is your payroll. And maybe total disbursements, including owner's draws, any debt payments, credit cards, stuff like that, total expenses, maybe that's 100K. So your total payroll is 50, total disbursements is 100. If you have a cash of 50 or less, you basically are at cash position zero, as we call it, and you have to start cutting costs. Unfortunately, you can't be I guess you can't be too creative with that. If you're at that spot, you have to start finding some ways to trim. That's unfortunate news for some, but we've found in our experience there's really no way around it. But if you're at cash position one, you're in a decent spot. You've got 1 month of cash on hand in terms of your disbursements. Now, if you go through this process, you have 1 month of cash on hand, you have 1 month of receivables incoming, and sessions are increasing. You have kind of a basic, in a basic way of saying it, you have about 2.5 to 3 months of revenue coming in, right? You're on a good track with your sessions, you're on a good track with your receivables, you're on a good track with your cash. That's really, really good. A lot of people think that this has to be super complex. It doesn't necessarily have to be. When you look at some of these really high level metrics, you can gain a little bit of confidence. Now, if those things aren't on track, the question is, well, what do you do? Well, with the receivables, if that's not looking good, well, then you lean on the folks with your EHR and your billers, okay? If your session counts aren't looking very good, well, then you lean on your folks doing your marketing and your intake. And then if your cash balance doesn't look very good, then you lean on maybe yourself for whether or not you need to cut costs, whether you have some excessive spending, or, dare I say it, whether owner's draws might be a little bit heavy for this season you're in right now in your business. So, yeah, high level metrics. Again, if you look at those key things, keep in mind this might be overly conservative for some, but you're going to lean into that sort of safe zone where when you start thinking about new expenses, new hires, new marketing programs or whatever, you're going to be doing this from a place that's relatively safe and conservative. So now we're going to get a little bit into why people don't do this. And most owners are going to avoid this because it means they have to be critical of things. That's kind of painful, right? Especially if it means we have to be a little bit critical of ourselves, which ultimately, as an owner, it's very important to acknowledge there's a lot of responsibility you have. The buck really does stop with you, both literally and figuratively. And sometimes it really is just on you to be the one to make the change, do the hard thing, and make the hard decision, and dig into things to find these answers, right? So that's one thing. That's a little bit painful. That's why we avoid it. But there's also another kind of pain with this, which is, when you really start digging into this, the way we describe it to our clients is if you're trying to figure out what's wrong, the problem is you're never going to find one thing. It's always a variety, right? There's like 50% of the problem is this thing and 60% of it's here. And then maybe this other thing over there is 20%, but you could fix it. But then, it's you go from black and white to gray. And that's why I like these slides to be black and white, because I like to remind my clients in business, there's nothing that's black and white. You're always making a lot of judgment calls. And ultimately, the more you kind of have all of these things kind of giving you input, the better sort of your educated or your educated guess can be about the calculated risk you'll take. But it's worth being honest with yourself. Like, this isn't easy. Trying to make these judgment calls, trying to see the forest, trying not to lose the forest for the trees is a little bit of a challenge. And so just keep in mind, if you watch some of these things over and over, if you're consistent with looking at what's going on, the things that stick out that are most important for your decision making will, and it'll be a lot easier. So the main thing I say is try to just develop some consistency around this, because it will help you so much. Now let's talk a little bit about lost profitability. There's a big slide about it. Boom. So we've seen clients have all kinds of weird issues with all kinds of things and for all kinds of reasons. And here's just a few things that are kind of a big deal that you want to watch out for. Billing leaks are by far one of the least, what am I trying to say? They're more common than people realize, and they cause more of a problem than people realize. What I've seen with a lot of my clients is, we know that insurance companies are doing their thing, and it's always a challenge, and they're gonna have denials and all this stuff, but we can't become numb to it, right? So like, I really encourage clients to address their billing by using an outsourced group until they get quite large, and then they basically have both. They have an internal biller handling the bulk of things, and then an external biller handling sort of the nuanced things. But when you're small, when we think about strategy is ultimately doing what we can now to make next month, next quarter, next year better. And one of the best things you can do is make sure that your billing is secured and that people are collecting all of the amounts. Some billers will do like a percentage method for their own revenue with you, right? What you pay them for them to do this work. And some people will see that percentage and they'll realize they'll think it's kind of excessive, but the truth is the right biller will be getting, money in that you would have never gotten in. They're going to respond to those denials. They're going to respond to the late paying payers, and they're going to make sure that your revenue cycle is tight and under control. So to a large extent, they earn their keep. And without that expert help, it can be very difficult to diagnose where those holes in the bucket are. So we strongly encourage that. Excess admin expenses. One of the big things is owners will often try to sort of hire problems away by hiring admin people. I had a prospect come to me once and she said, "I think I'm paying too much for admin." And I said, "Okay, well, let's talk about it. How many admin people do you have?" And she said, "I got 5 admin." "Okay, all right, cool. How many clinicians do you have?" "I've got 5 clinicians." And I thought, wow, I think you are very aware of your own problem, and I think you need to dial back that admin. But it's even the case that sometimes you can hire 1 or 2 admin people as support, and if their role isn't clearly defined, if you're not investing in their skill sets, if you're not really kind of nurturing them up to do the things that they can be really good at, and treating their role as a strategic investment, you can find yourself really kind of spinning your wheels and not getting a lot of help there. So similar with this, in the vein of sort of your admin expenses, I typically like to recommend people using expert outside help, people who've been and done and seen things. Make sure you're not, getting bloat in your admin expenses. Early owner cash out. I see this a lot, so if the practice is starting to hum along and do pretty well, keep in mind you may want to hold off on sort of the lifestyle adjustment, as I like to say. Try to put that off until you really feel like you've invested in your business all that you want to and accomplished all the things that you ultimately want to. Sort of a maturity of your practice before you sort of change your lifestyle maybe significantly. So I would just say watch out for that. Be careful of what happens and when. Of course, it's your practice, it's your money, and it is there to help you succeed. But you might create issues if you sort of get ahead of the game there. Ideally, what we want to do is we want to take the surplus from that business, put it back in the business and grow it, put it back into the team, build the team so they build the business, build the resources so that builds the business. Try to look for those opportunities before you maybe make some of those personal changes. And then unmonitored investments, all of these things we're talking about, unfortunately, you got to watch it all. There's not really much that you'll do in terms of hiring or outsourcing or billing or really anything where you can set it and forget it. That's where it gets tough for owners. But the thing is, you will just want to do things in sort of a routine manner. Check some of these things. Watch out for the ones that are performing well. The ones that aren't, swap them out and replace them. That's okay. And then watch out for debt and watch out for neglected negotiations. We got a lot of clients that just get behind on that renegotiation date with that insurance. Don't let that date go in the past. Be right on it anytime that comes up. So let's talk a little bit about aligning financial operations. So the books, the accounting, a lot of people think they're doing accounting to make their accountant happy, or they're doing it so they can file their taxes. The accounting you have all the reports and all the data, that's for you first and foremost. And it's got to serve you first and foremost. One of the things I do like about the Profit First system is it's very much owner oriented. We're going to do these books in a way that suit me as an owner of this company. And ultimately, that's what it's there for. It's got to make sense to you. Very importantly, it's got to be current and caught up. So I just like to say that, like keep those clean, organized books and make sure ultimately, above all, they work for you. But yeah, and you must monitor and act on your numbers or you're guessing. That Deming quote is really a big deal. So be aware of what they are and always get new ones integrated. Look at them consistently, really kind of get them into your brain. So the more you look at them, the more they'll feel fresh, the more these comparisons will automatically kind of happen in your mind, and you'll get those answers you need bubbling up. So let's talk about some benchmarks. So In the corporate finance world, the CFO world, they really are run a lot by benchmarks. They're looking for what net income is, how much people are typically spending on different types of expenses. What are these brackets? It's a good way to get sort of a basic cost control. A lot of budgets are developed, from this as an initial standpoint, mostly to cover costs, and make sure that they stay in line. So this is some stats on how practices mostly work, right? And what these compensate or what these payroll numbers and admin numbers and income numbers are. You should just kind of track these yourself, see how they're sitting. Most of you are probably on a cash basis with your accounting. So try to go back and maybe always look back at like the prior 12 months, maybe prior 3 to 6 months, and sort of run these averages and make sure that your accounting system tells you these sort of brackets, right? So have accounts for your clinical payroll where you record that bucket and your admin expenses, including that payroll. And then of course you're going to have your net income. You might even to the bottom, I'll show you a little bit of this later on. You might even break out some particular costs in your own financials so that they tell you what you specifically need. Keep in mind, it's for you. But these percentages can be a really good guide. Now, this 50 to 70% of payroll, I will say, you could, in some respects, have clinicians paid more or less than that. This is where the average overall number will be. But if you have questions on that, we'll hit it here in a little bit. So the financial infrastructure, primarily the speed and routine of reviewing your results. You want to keep up on it, and you want to keep your eyes on it. So a profit and loss by month is a very good overall report to look at. Looking at net income, when you look at your business, the thing you're trying to design your business, your practice to do is to never have a loss ever. I know that's a bold claim, maybe, but you want to think about if you ever see a loss in your business, something's not working right. You should have enough wiggle room where things can zig and zag, and even in your lower months, you don't ever actually have that situation where you lost money that month. You need that buffer. And then again, you're going to see like any of those surpluses, you'll reinvest, but still you should see maybe a short dip, but then you should see it play out well. Or, if it doesn't, you have to think maybe we have the wrong resource in this place. The balance sheet by month, you're going to want to track your assets, your liabilities, and your equity. Again, major categories is really all you need here. It doesn't have to be too crazy. And then we talked about the sessions, the accounts receivable aging, and how that helps. Hiring. So I hear a lot of talk about hiring. There's a lot of things on Instagram talking to practice owners about how do you hire and how do you do this and how you do that. So like the main thing I see practice owners doing is they feel a little bit of stress in the practice and they typically lean into hiring, right? So they want to get more people on board. They want to get more clinicians on board. There's a real risk to a practice if it becomes too spread out in its foundation, meaning we have a whole lot of sessions, or we have sessions being done by a whole lot of people. Ideally, what we want to do for stability is we want to try to have a good, reasonable kind of average across all of our clients. And so there's a term I like to use called internal and historical capacity. Internal capacity is going to be, people are going to say sort of their goals for where they want to be with their session counts and their caseload, as therapists, how much sort of that work they want to accomplish. That's going to be sort of the internal capacity of what these people want to accomplish, what their sort of aspirational goal of productivity is. But then there's sort of a historical capacity. And the historical capacity is when you look at all of your clinicians, let's think about their productivity and think about their historical max, right? So, their aspirational goal and their historical max are different sort of metrics to lean into how you coach them and what your expectations are and what they're able to sort of reasonably and comfortably accomplish. I'm very sensitive and appreciative of the limits of the work, right? Even I went to my therapist once at the end of a session. I was like, you're going to go talk to somebody else now? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me how that could even happen because, I needed a nap and I figured he needed a break. So I'm sensitive to that. The numbers are, it's a nuanced conversation, as I like to say, between the clinician and their supervision and the owner. Like, we have to be really mindful. There's a lot that goes into that. But the main thing I'm trying to say here is, unless you feel like you're getting pretty close to your overall historical capacity, meaning everyone's kind of max, you're probably not at that stage where you should hire another clinician. That's the main thing to look for. You probably want to coach people internally because you have unused historical and internal capacity in this case. Try to use that up first. I notice, one of the things that's a little bit of an issue, I had one practice owner I was working with a long time. She was very, very clear and wanting people to set their own caseload, set their own hours. I told her I thought there was some concerns with how that would work out because I think they wanted coaching from her. I think they wanted to develop their professional resilience and ultimately they wanted to be more productive. And so she was losing a lot of clinicians, even though she was very sensitive to their time and sensitive to their schedule, which of course I still am. But the problem is, if these people are coming to us and sort of in the subtext of what they're saying and thinking, if they really want to be coached up and they really want to be more productive, they want to help more people and they want to make more money, they're looking for that from us. They're going to feel a little bit stressed when they see another hire and they've got, historical or internal capacity that they're not filling. And so keep in mind your team probably you want to it's sort of a quick way to sort of solve that pain point is to just grab another hire another person. But the thing that will really build your practice, build your people, they'll build your business, your practice. So focus in on that and make sure you're paying attention to that capacity. That's something I see a lot of practice owners kind of struggle with. And of course, be sensitive to the challenges they're facing in their work. It's real, and I know that's why I think it's very important for practices to be led by clinicians, because only you all really know kind of what that entails. And so then hiring, yeah, you want to look for your inquiry trends. Are we on an upward trend with inquiries? Do we have a lot of people calling, contacting us? Do we have a wait list maybe? And if that's the case, okay, cool. We're checking that capacity. We're seeing that that's okay. People are getting full. They're hitting their marks where they were before and at least where they want to go. And if we have sort of an upward trend of inquiries, those are the things that we're looking for. And then we want to make sure we're communicating closely with the team on the expectations and what their growth track is. I'm also really big, we can't have salaried clinicians unless they're in a hybrid role. If there's a question on what I mean by that, let's dig into it. But I got to make up some time. I get a little long-winded. Whenever I write these things, I always put too much in, so I apologize for that. So yeah, compensation. Again, kind of going back to that spectrum we're moving along, when these clinicians are becoming more autonomous, they're retaining their patients in the appropriate way, right? They're graduating out of their treatment plans when they should, but not before they should, right? When those things are good and they're developing this professional resilience, that's like this little fire we got to build and like throw more wood on the fire. They're starting to really lock in, for lack of a better way of putting it. They're starting to really succeed in their career and they're really starting to grow as a clinician. You've got to watch out for that. And you've got to upgrade their compensation when they've upgraded their skills, because otherwise you'll lose them. And so, keep in mind, people aren't in the situation where they come into a professional setting and they're not just going to ride it out. So don't just do it like once a year. Do it when you see those things happening. When they're hitting their goals, be ready for it. And that's an example. If you're watching your cash, your receivables, if you're watching your session trends and your inquiry trends or whatever else is involved, you're keeping tune to those metrics, then you're seeing these people starting to succeed and do well. Reinvest in them, move them along that career track. Talk to them about what their goals are for productivity or work-life balance or whatever those things are, and think about whether and how you can help them accomplish what they're trying to while also accomplishing what you want to. That's what we're doing when we talk about making a really good deal. Okay, so what if this stuff isn't working out? Well, so if you're watching all this stuff regularly and you see a drop in inquiries, you'll see a drop in inquiries before you see a drop in sessions, right? So if you watch that, you see even further ahead. But like, if you see a drop in inquiries, you see a drop in sessions, you see a drop in receivables, you see a drop in cash. Okay, well, now we got to sort of hit the brakes a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that, right? So this is where I've come up with an acronym, GODE, GOAD, right? Goading us into further success. It stands for growth-oriented discretionary expenses. It's just the way I call it, and I hope it works for you. But the idea is, and I'm giving you a little bit of an example. In this case, it's out of QuickBooks, which a lot of you are probably using, but like these growth-oriented discretionary expenses, whether they're marketing or intake or a new biller or a new EHR, like whatever these things are that you've sort of put your money, time, and resources into, you want to know off the top of your head what they are, how much they cost, and how soon they're going to get to sort of their own maturity, where they're going to prove their worth, right? As they say in the business world, return on investment. You want to know, are you getting your return on investment with these things or not? And be at the ready at any time you might need to sort of cut one of these investments. Now, I say that, it sounds a little bit maybe mercenary, but what I'm saying is before you ever start one of these things, tell that vendor, tell that new person you're working with, tell that marketer, tell whoever, say, hey, I'm testing this out. Don't ever sign a long-term contract. For us, it's always month to month because we know clients might need to zig and zag. They can't be locked in because your revenue isn't locked in that way, right? So you have to be flexible and you have to look for these things. And I put this right here because in most of your accounting systems, you're going to have like a net operating income that this income statement is already giving you. And you can put these growth-oriented discretionary expenses here in this other expense section, right? Just put it where it's convenient for you. And this says miscellaneous, but you could call it, I don't know, let's call it, alliance marketing, and then put a date for when you think you're supposed to start seeing more inquiries because of what they are doing. And then every time you're looking at this, you're like, okay, well, Alliance has, 6 more weeks, they've got 4 more weeks, they've got 2 more weeks. Or as you're looking at it, you say, man, something just shifted, something just changed. Maybe we lost a clinician, whatever might have happened, but now we need to pivot. Well, you know where to look. You've already had the right conversation with that vendor for what their expectations should be, or that new hire, or like whatever. And you've said, hey, we're testing this out. And then you've got this in a spot where it's very easy for you to track it and always look. And you've got a number here where you can see is net operating income still positive on its own? And then are we negative after this investment? That's what we're looking for. So try to make it easy on yourself. You can. And leverage that accounting system so it gives you those answers you need in real time. So yeah, just kind of a summary here. Cash position 1, you're good for another month. Receivables at 1 month, you're good for another month. Sessions same or increasing, you're good for yet another month. That's what we're after here. So if any of them come up short, treat it as if that month of projected cash flow is gone. So if receivables trying to drop below 1 month, okay, we can't count on that. If our cash position ends up at cash position 0, okay, we don't have any money on hand, but maybe our sessions are still increasing. All right, well then we're probably feeling pretty good, but we don't have 2.5 to 3 months of sort of projection. So above all else, fly the plane. So here's an analogy that'll help, right? So pilots, when they're flying these planes up in the sky, they have all of these checklists that they have to follow. And in some cases, they have checklists they barely ever look at. I was talking to this pilot once. He told me that, they were coming in and the tower told them they were going to have a wind shear effect. And so he goes, oh, okay. So he goes over and he pulls out this binder and he's looking up the procedures for the emergency wind shear maneuver, right? And so it's odd to think that you're in the back doing your thing, hoping these pilots are looking out the window. In reality, they're strolling through all these binders trying to figure out what the heck to do, But that's kind of how their business works. The actual, just a tidbit, the most common workman's comp claim, workers' compensation injury claim for airlines was pilots reaching over their seat at the end of a flight, pulling the big bag of all these binders and books with all the manuals and everything over the seat and injuring their back, right? The checklists run what they do. And so I bring this up because at the top of all of these checklists, as often as they look at them, the first step is always fly the plane, right? So the idea is they're reminding these pilots, they're saying, don't get your head all buried in this book and just lose what you're doing. Make sure you keep the plane stable and level and moving in the right direction. Do that first, and then go through these steps to figure out what else you're doing. So, what is this for you? Okay, it's not spoken nearly enough. You're going to talk to marketers, you're going to talk to folks in legal and HR and all these folks helping your business. What is the most important thing? You have to serve your customers. You have to give them what they want and need. So here's an example. If you've got your head buried in financial reports, if you've got your head, looking at your employee handbook, if you're looking at all this stuff, okay, none of that stuff is a bad idea. All those are good things to do, but the most important thing is that when your customers are coming to you, they're getting a great experience. Patients are getting served, they're treated well, professionally. All those things are happening. Everything else is downstream. So that's your version of don't forget to fly the plane. Don't lose sight of this. This is that product market fit and it trumps everything. So, but, mostly keep in mind you all are healing the world one session at a time. And if you can do that, then you can run an awesome business, hands down. You have such an edge in this. Keep in mind, most people running businesses, they don't understand people very well, and they're not good managers, and they don't even know what people want or why they're there, or what they're doing with their career. And that's why they lose them. But you have these skills. You have these interpersonal skills, these ways to see what people are thinking, what they're thinking that they're not saying, and what they should be thinking that they don't even know yet, right? You've done that work and you're exceptional at it. Keep in mind, most companies that are large and successful, who are they hiring for HR? They're hiring folks like you. They're hiring psychologists. They're hiring therapists and counselors and social workers because you know how people work and you know what they're saying or what they're not saying, and ultimately what can be done to help them be happy and satisfied. So you can do well with your teams, you can do well with your therapists if you're just listening and you're careful and you're making sure that you make a good deal for them and a good deal for you and don't get overextended in either direction. So that's most of that. Now, keep in mind you can reach out to us, we can help. Again, this isn't like just to be a presentation about us, but this is how you can find us. This is our name. We're CAC Advisors. But I want to pivot a little bit before we move into questions because we've got, how many folks do we have? We've got like 26
20.
folks here
Yep.
today.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. One-time offer. If you are here today, I'm going to show you something. This is going to go out to everybody, but if you're here today, you're going to get our support, one session of support with helping you with this tool. Now, I want to show you a little bit of this. So should be very familiar to you. Let me zoom out. So you're going to get this template. We're going to put it on where people are accessing the recording. But this is a claims accounting report. Comes right out of Checkpoint. All right. We're going to set up this template for you where you can pull out your claims accounting report. You can pull out your P&L by month. All right, we just talked about it. This is just sample data, right? And very importantly, you can get these charts, okay? So this is a comparison, right, between our charges in Checkpoint, our payments in Checkpoint, and our receipts in QuickBooks. Now, it's very important that we see some correspondence here. Now, a lot of the time when people are, I think I might have mentioned this one client I was working with. I gave this presentation. This lady asked me two questions. By the time she asked me the second question, she was almost despondent. She was actually crying, and in front of all these people. So I told her, hey, let's talk afterwards. I met with her and she told me that she told me that someone was working for her and they had rerouted several of her insurance payments and they weren't actually making it to her bank. Very sadly, she lost $400,000 because this person had basically stolen money by changing where the money was going. Unfortunately, all she needed was something like this. Now, let me pop over here because this is a little bit easier to see the trend. This is a cumulative comparison. And so here you'll see we have charges, we have payments, we have receipts. This is helpful to see, like, if, kind of dig into sort of the details, how one particular week relates to another. But ultimately, This is a huge safeguard for you. Ideally, you'd be like most businesses where they track every single receipt and it flows through and nothing gets lost. It's a little bit tough in this case between EHRs and billers and different accounting systems and stuff like that. But at a minimum, you can do something like this. And what you would see if someone was, let's say that example, if someone was stealing money from you, this receipts line would just start to depart from what you see in your EHR. It's going to be super obvious, right? But if they're all kind of marching a little bit of a different pace, but they're all sort of heading in the same direction as people, if you remember geometry, right? They have the same slope. If they have the same kind of average trend, you're mostly doing okay. And yeah, it'd be great if you could kind of watch every single number and make sure you didn't lose a penny, but at a minimum, you need this. And again, this is just kind of that thing, we're going to set this up for you so you can drop this data from Checkpoint, drop in your P&L by month, and boom, you'll have this chart. So yeah, and anyone on this call, I'd be glad to spend, a little bit of time with you, making sure this works for you specifically, because again, I want this to live and I want this to be valuable for you. So that's most of what I wanted to share. And I love to dig into some questions, unless I've just bored you to tears and everyone's taking a nap, which that's probably good for your health. So why not?
No, you were good. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think that could be a really valuable tool for some folks. Yeah, so just a reminder, if you all have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A at the top of your screen. I made a couple of posts there during the presentation. If you can't find it for whatever reason, feel free to use the chat. Just keep PHI and all that good stuff in mind when using that. But yeah, so let's see what we have here to kick us off.
And anything's fair game. If it doesn't relate to the talk, you can throw it out. If you've got a concern about your accounting or your reporting or where answers might come from, is fair game. I just want to take the time to do anything that might help you all. So
Okay, awesome. Let's see. So you highlighted session counts, receivables, cash balance. If someone, maybe only had time to track like one of those, which would you prioritize and why?
cash balance, number one. Yeah. If you think about it this way, cash balance is going to be sort of this master diagnostic for the whole business. So it doesn't tell you like everything. Like, if you're losing cash, right? For instance, your cash is dropping, that single number of what is in your cash isn't going to tell you what the problem is necessarily. But very importantly, it's going to tell you there is a problem. To set a standard, your cash should be increasing every single month. If it's not doing that, something isn't functioning very well, or you have a temporary investment that's kind of using up some cash so you can sort of get some ground and do something strategic. But you want to watch that most of all. That's going to be all the way down, the trend, all the way at the end of this whole chain of things. Yeah. So that's my answer to that.
Okay, awesome. What are the primary drivers that push receivables out beyond that 30-day window?
Oh, yes. So, the first one, of course, is getting those notes done. I know the notes just pile up and people get behind, but we really have to have a strong discipline around the notes, the claims, and getting those things out, right? So, as quickly to the session as possible, get that billing flywheel sort of into motion, get that thing into the pipeline, get ahead of it. So, really keeping that strong discipline and not letting clinicians, arrive their patients late, do their notes late. We want to have a strong culture around that of wanting those bills to go out, wanting those claims to come in. You can always remind your clinicians like, hey, if we have a good, strong revenue cycle, we have good, strong compensation. They're hand in hand. So yeah, that, and then of course, any late payments, or I should say, late bills. If you're doing your own billing, again, you've got to have a really strong discipline in that. Sometimes doing it, every day, every other day. Just keeping up on it because you don't want that clock to run out. So yeah, just staying ahead of it with all of those little things. and then following up on any denials. The insurance company denies things like a hiccup, and you want to hit them with brute force anytime they do. So watch out for those denials, get those notes and claims out. That's the main thing. So
Okay, awesome. And I'm going to do a little shameless plug. So Checkpoint is really great at monitoring late notes, and the notes get submitted to the insurance company as soon as they are signed. So
yeah,
there's
that's
no time
perfect.
wasted there.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, things that's part of what we're after with these EHRs. We want them to ping us, right? There's so much stuff to look at. I mean, be honest with yourself as an owner of a practice, like you've got all this stuff to look at. It just goes on and on and on and on. And so tools like that are huge when it brings it to your attention.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. What's the biggest mistake you think owners make when they feel like cash is like fine? They're like, oh, we're fine.
Um, yeah, I mean, just kind of hearing that question, I think the biggest mistake there would be what's the standard? What's just fine? The standard that I'm trying to encourage you to have is that you should see cash growing every month, or you should consider that something needs to change. So a lot of the time when they think we're fine, what's usually happening, what I see usually happening is they're not prepared for the things that might not go well, right? So what could happen if you have a downturn in sessions? What could happen if one of your clinicians, God forbid, they have an injury or they're out of the office or they quit, right? They're obviously part of your revenue cycle and producing things. And the clinical productivity is covering those administrative expenses you have. So you can't get complacent. Cash position one is really just the beginning. It's not a bad idea to have a goal of saving up to 6 months of cash on hand. Then you can handle a downturn in sessions. You can handle any issues with billing, all of those things. So that would be the main thing that I would say is have a lofty standard for what you're accomplishing with your cash and endeavor to grow it. And if things are sliding, make sure you're just aware of it and you start diagnosing the problem. You deserve to have a business that is growing in cash every single week and month so that you sleep well and you're confident that when the right opportunities come up, you can reinvest. So that's what I would say.
Okay, awesome. What's one quick win that practices could implement to plug a major profitability leak?
Um, yeah, so I would say the quickest win I've found practices have is with a simple chart like I showed, you can see if there's a billing issue. That's important. And if there's a billing issue, changing how you're doing your billing. That's huge. The other big thing that I've seen most practices struggle with is they have inquiries, but they're not doing their intake very well. And you can have a lot of inquiries coming on, but if you don't get those people in that room with that clinician and do it efficiently and quickly and strongly and urgently, like you're really paying close attention to them, you'll lose them. The standard conversion for new calls is about 30 to 50% for private pay and 60 to 80 for insurance. You want to be the top end of those, landing those people, and so pay attention to your intake and pay attention to your billing. So yeah, those are the two things. Probably billing number one. Yeah.
Okay, great. And final closing question. If someone just takes one action after this webinar, what would you recommend that it is?
Yeah, I mean, simply I would look at your cash and your receivables and your sessions, see how you stack up to some of these metrics. And if you look at it and you feel really confident that you've got sort of a 3-month plan, think about what you could do with what quote unquote would be your extra, your surplus right now. What could you do that would make next month reliably, predictably, confidently better for you and your practice? Start there. And then if you don't see good answers from doing that little exercise, start thinking about what's not working. What wires aren't connected? What things did you plan out that aren't panning out? And start doing some change, making some changes. So
Awesome, thanks.
yeah.
All right.
All right. All right. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. So if today's conversation sparked any ideas or questions, we'd love to continue that conversation with you. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to connect further. You can visit us at www.checkpointehr.com. And I think there are also, obviously, there are the QR codes for scanning information as well. And this will also go out to everyone that registered today. So you'll have all the contact information for everyone involved. And we thank you again.
Thanks
Have
so
a great
much.
rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cool, cool, cool.